Season 2 of The Witcher Netflix did what? Hi everybody, my name is Tracy, also known as Magitech on the internet, and I love all things Witcher. I make a lot of content related to The Witcher videos. I've streamed it in the past, I like to do cosplay, and I just generally like to talk about my passion about The Witcher on the internet and share my passion with all of you. 2 years ago, I went through all of season 1 of The Witcher Netflix and shared my personal thoughts and went through everything. And now I want to do the same with season 2. Season 2 of The Witcher Netflix was a wild ride, and no pun intended, with spoilers, all of the references to the Wild Hunt made this season. I want to talk about some things about season 2. But before I get into it, I want to go through a few things and address a few things before I talk about the season. First of all, yes, there will be spoilers to season 2, and then also I talk about the books and things. So if you're not a fan of spoilers, make sure you just watch season 2 before you watch this video. Secondly, I want to talk about opinions. People on the internet who have opinions. We all are opinionated folk. It's part of our human nature to be opinionated. And you know what? Opinions can change over time. I went back and watched some of my videos from my initial reactions to season 1, and I realized that my opinions changed on that show over the course of 2 years. And you know what? That's okay. It's good for us to share initial reactions to things. It's good to kind of share your reactions when they're fresh, because after you give them some time to marinate, they often change. And that's totally okay. Those of us who have hobbies and passions, we tend to get a lot more passionate about our things that we love. For me, The Witcher is one of those things where it's very, very close and dear to my heart, so I get very passionate about my opinions. Many people may or may not disagree with the things that I feel about the show. We can all love or hate pieces of media, with whatever reasoning we feel is the right reasoning for things. Secondly, I want to talk about the amount of work that gets put into creating a piece of media like this. I think one thing that has made my opinions and decisions change over the past few years is that my role in my professional career has also changed. I'm now a product manager, and I actually know what goes into creating something and bringing it to an audience, for them to love it, for them to hate it, for them to have all of their opinions thrown at you about it, and it's a lot. I'm not a filmmaker, and I don't do anything in the entertainment industry. I do something in computer hardware, but I can still sympathize and relate to what goes into creating something and sharing it with an audience for them to judge. And also, as a fan of The Witcher Netflix in general, I have watched a lot of interviews. I've seen a lot of things of the showrunners and all of the actors and how much love, passion, dedication, blood, sweat, and tears that they put into making this. And I know at the end of the day, it's a job. They get a paycheck from it, a very big paycheck. I get a paycheck for what I do too. But there is also a level of passion that goes into these projects, and I don't do anything to diminish the passion that was put into this project, because I can genuinely see it in the faces of the showrunners and many of the actors as well. They are really passionate about this universe, and seeing that makes me happy. I want to give a big round of applause for all of the actors who were in The Witcher Netflix. Every actor did a tremendous job at their role, and I was just a really big fan of all of the actors this season. I think I underappreciated some of them from season 1, and now I appreciate them a little bit more. So I want to just say that and shout out all of the actors in the season. The last thing before I get into this is talking about adaptations. Adaptations are a very interesting thing, and a lot of times when media is created, mostly TV shows and movies are the big factors for this. But when an adaptation is created, a lot of times we want to see adaptations that bring the life of the source material to it. In 2021, we saw a lot of adaptations for a lot of cool media come out. We saw Foundation series, Wheel of Time were two adaptations that I think were, in the initial reactions to them, many would say that they strayed a lot from what was the original source material in good ways or bad. I'm not here to discuss that. Then we had Dune, for example, another adaptation of a book that I think many would probably say did do a good job doing an adaptation of its original source material. Then we have something like Cowboy Bebop, for example. That came out, and though it wasn't originally adapted from a book, it was adapted from an anime. Many would say that probably wasn't the best example of an adaptation. So this year, we've seen a lot of different examples of maybe good or bad adaptations. Again, that's all subjective based on your taste and personal opinions. But now we have The Witcher Season 2 that launched and has its own opinions and initial reactions to how it was adapted from its original source material. So I'm not here to dictate what is good or what is bad adaptation. That's not really my expertise or not something that I want to comment on too much. But I will say that this season was a huge chunk of new material. And I'm going to say that probably only like 20% of it was actually true to the source material. The rest of it was stuff that the showrunners and the people who made the show made up. Cinematically, everything was beautiful. I just feel like there was a step up in budget from this season and the previous season. Not so much where I was like, they're totally different shows, but just certain scenes I just feel like were a lot better than season 1. That said, most of the dialogue was pretty good, and they did pull some quotes directly from Blood of Elves. Some characters said quotes from Blood of Elves that were different characters saying it in this show, but they still pulled out some of those quotes, which was nice. Some of the dialogue I personally do think was a little cheesy. I'm getting tired of all of the F-bombs that are dropped and everything. I get it, like they've kind of made that their shtick now, and I'm okay with it. Not my favorite thing, but to each their own. I think this season opens really strongly, and I would even say that episode 1 was probably the strongest episode of the season, and honestly probably even just good as a standalone episode. Like it is kind of a contained short story, very much like many of the previous episodes in season 1 and just the first 2 books in general. They are very self-contained short stories that you can read and digest and get something very good in a short period of time. The rest of the show did feel like one continuous movie that I was watching. Part of me is glad that I sat and binged it all in one sitting, because it was, I was absorbing things, and as they were going through each episode, a lot of it wasn't very contained, self-contained stories like season 1. So that was something that I thought was interesting about this, and, my choice to binge watch it. But as I was going through each episode, things were straying more and more from the source, where I was even like lost at where we were going with the story. I remember watching an interview with Henry Cavill before this season dropped, where Henry Cavill said that there was going to be a lot of new material in this season that for book readers, they would be, surprised to see a lot of new material. And I was like, boy, he wasn't joking. He wasn't joking on all of the new material. As we went through it, I was actually watching it with my boyfriend, and he has not read the books. And so he was asking me questions about the plot, and I was like, man, I don't even know where this is going. I'm with you. I'm sitting here watching with anticipation on what's going to happen next, because I don't even know what's going to happen. The big things in the plot that were big changes that I personally wasn't a fan of was the entire Volith Mare plot was an added thing, and I didn't really like it. I could get into a whole tangent on why I didn't like it. And that basically starts in episode 2 and 3, where we have Francesca, Fringilla, and Yennefer, who have these similar dreams. And as that was happening, I was like, oh, okay, tell me more. And they were all having different people in their visions. It ends up being one person. It's this demon woman named Volith Mare. And she's also the one who we learn this as, exposition continues later on in Kaer Morhen, that she was the one that killed the first Witchers. So we're learning more about this character, and this is all new to me. This is all new to everybody. We're all learning about this. But that is what brings Fringilla and Francesca together, and what brings Yennefer to a lot of her plot in the story. So The Volith Mare stuff I thought was going to be one side thing. That was a huge, big chunk of this plot and the driving factor of all the things that were happening throughout this plot. And Yennefer in this season also loses her powers. That's one of the other things that I was not a big fan of. I'm okay with it, and at first I liked it. She used fire magic last season, and that's what brought her to not have her powers for such a long time. And I liked it at first because I feel like Yennefer as a character, and we learned this a lot from season 1, nothing comes easy to Yennefer, and she's had to work hard for everything that she's gotten. Nothing has been handed to her on a platter, and she has worked hard to get where she is. And the fact that she loses her power, I think that's another big struggle for her, and it's interesting to watch her struggle. When it was first happening, I was okay with it because I was like, oh, cool, this is a new struggle for Yennefer, and she's such a resilient and strong character. I want to see how she gets through this. I want to see how she's able to recover her power. Unfortunately, when it came to the conclusion of the season, how she was able to get her power back, I personally wasn't too thrilled with. The show decided to take some direction with Yennefer's character and make her, very self-serving, and she is a self-serving character in many ways, but she put it at the detriment of Ciri, and that's not something I personally think Yennefer would do. I think it's totally fine to take liberties with certain characters, and I'll talk more about that later, as long as it stays true to who the character is at their core. And in some ways, I don't think that that's who Yennefer is at their core. You can totally disagree with me on this. I'm fine with it. When she took Ciri away and was ready to bring her to Sintra, which was such a huge danger to her, and totally going against Geralt's wishes. Obviously, as she was getting to know Ciri, she realized that this girl was special, and she felt a huge connection to Ciri. And I did like to see that, because that does happen a little bit in the books. I kind of do wish in that sense they did stick to a little bit more of what the books were, where Geralt summons Yennefer to the Temple of Melet-Tele and they train together, and their relationship does start off pretty rocky. Yennefer and Ciri do not get along at first, but then they grow this very special bond, and you see that at the very end of this book, and it's a very heartwarming, and it's something that just makes me smile inside when I read that particular part of the book. They didn't really get on that. They might develop more of Yennefer and Ciri's relationship in season 3. It seems like that's where the direction's going. Geralt eventually, he says, "I'll never forgive you for what you did, Yen," but he does say, you should help train Ciri in magic. And so we're probably going to see a little bit more of that relationship. Maybe it'll be rocky. We'll see. Another interesting thing about adaptations is, yes, the show can take things from the source material and make it how they want. They did this with the episode Dear Friend, where I think many of us were expecting Dear Friend to involve a letter to Yennefer, where we would get a very snarky response from Yennefer in the Dear Friend letter. That didn't end up happening, and they took their own direction with that, where Ciri walks in on Yennefer and Geralt kissing after being reunited, and Ciri's like, "Who is this?" And Geralt says, "It's my dear friend, Yennefer." And Yennefer says, "Dear friend." And so we got a little bit of it, but that is one of those iconic moments from the book where if they could have just kept that, I think it probably would have been better. I didn't hate the little dear friend comments in the show, but so I jumped a little bit ahead there because of the Yennefer story arc and that whole plot. But let's talk about some other things that I maybe liked or didn't like in this season. Most of Kaer Morhen was really great. I think Ciri training in Kaer Morhen was awesome. I loved seeing a lot of the scenes in Kaer Morhen. Some things I think were questionable. One of the bigger complaints I've seen thus far is the decision to kill off Eskel. It shocked me. I actually had read online a little bit that this was potentially coming. I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I knew that one of the Witchers was gonna die. Eskel turning into a Leshy and dying, it was very confusing, and I was like, oh gosh, they're actually doing this. As far as the story goes, you know what? Eskel, as much as he's like a fan favorite Witcher, in the books, he doesn't have a lot of plot significance other than the Kaer Morhen stuff and Blood of Elves. So the show making the decision to kill him off for their own plot reasons, I guess is okay. It was fine, you know, and it helps establish the plot that they were trying to make. Weird stuff is happening with monsters, and ever since Ciri made that huge crack in the floor and the foundation and started, you know, with things with monoliths and more monsters coming into the world, it's, again, a whole thing that the show decided to add, and it creates their own plot, basically, for the show. So the Volith Mare thing and the Ciri opening up these monolith things were like totally new plot points, and they were hugely significant, but they didn't really come to the books at all. And I was like, okay. I want to say that Blood of Elves, I actually really like this book, but it's not the most exciting book of the Witcher saga. It's good, and it has a lot of foundational things for characters. It has a lot of good dialogue and a lot of good build-up for the rest of the book series, but it's not the most exciting. And so I never expected them to have a one-to-one adaptation of each chapter of the book. Honestly, I don't need to see all of Triss pining over Geralt in the first half of this book. Triss being in Kaer Morhen was done a lot more tastefully than how it was in this book. I don't need to see Geralt going to Oxenfurt and meeting Shani and sleeping with her and all that stuff. Honestly, I didn't need any of that. I personally would have loved to have seen a whole episode of political discourse between all of the kings and queens of the Northern Kingdoms, and they didn't have that, but you know what? It's okay. I'm not gonna be hung up over that. The fact that this wasn't a one-to-one representation of Blood of Elves, not the worst thing in the world. Eskel dying was a very interesting, you know, addition, and some of the things that they did in Kaer Morhen I wasn't a fan of. Having that, like, party with all of the hookers, blackjack and hookers at Kaer Morhen was a little weird as well. I wasn't totally vibing with it, but again, these are all things where even though I don't totally vibe with it, I'm not going to say it's the worst show or I'm going to hate it or anything like that. One of the other questionable character motivation things that I personally feel, like I said earlier, if it's adapted a certain way, that's fine. But if you do things with the character that I don't think they would do in the book, you know, the original source material, that's where I start getting a little questiony, was Vesemir. I think that Kim Bodnia did an amazing job portraying Vesemir and acting Vesemir as a character. I just thought it was great. However, the show deciding to take Vesemir in certain directions, I wasn't a big fan of. I didn't like that Vesemir was so ready to perform the Trial of the Grasses on Ciri. I was actually like yelling at the TV. I'm like, don't you do it, Vesemir. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. And then Geralt walked in and was able to stop it. But I was like, are they seriously about to make Vesemir do this? From a certain point of view, I understand this. They want to make it that Vesemir is really, he cares about his Witchers, and he cares about the plight of the Witchers in general. And we've learned that from Nightmare of the Wolf. By the way, cool little references to Nightmare of the Wolf in the show. And now we're seeing that in the show. They're making Vesemir very much about the Witchers. So I understand in theory why he would want to do this, but I don't think Vesemir would ever want to go against Geralt in that way. And I think Vesemir does care about Ciri, but I wasn't able to see that much in this show. And then toward the end of the series, when Ciri gets possessed by Volith Mare, freaking Vesemir was ready to just kill her. And I was like, would Vesemir actually do this? I don't know. Again, we don't get a lot of Vesemir in the books. I think his most significant role probably is in Blood of Elves, though we do get him later on in the series. So we don't know a ton about Vesemir's character. And I guess there maybe some of my bias is coming from the Witcher games, where we see a lot more of Vesemir, but I'm just like, I don't know if Vesemir would actually do this. To me, Vesemir has always been the wisest one, who imparts his wisdom upon his Witcher sons. And in the last episode, it was actually Geralt that was giving Vesemir a pep talk, a wise wisdom talk. Geralt was giving this to Vesemir, when normally it should be reversed. Vesemir should be giving the wise pep talks to Geralt, which he did do in the earlier season when Ciri first arrived at Kaer Morhen. But the fact that he was just so ready to attack her, he was trying to defend his Witchers, but I don't know if I would agree that that's something Vesemir would do. So those were some of the things that I think were my bigger criticisms of the show. Let's talk about some things that I think were pretty cool, or, I liked. The fact that the elves got a lot more recognition in this show, I think was really cool. It seems very much like this show is trying to set up these different factions and how you can, sympathize or support these different factions. And that is a lot of what The Witcher is at its core. They've made the mages and the Brotherhood of Mages, a very much one sector that you could support. The Witchers are their own thing. The elves are their own thing that you could support. And even Nilfgaard maybe would be their own faction. We see more and more of these different factions, and we get to see their point of view, and we get to learn and understand their struggles and how they're trying to fix their struggles on the continent. The fact that the elves and Nilfgaard formed this alliance throughout the season, I thought it was cool. It's a little bit different from the books. Francesca does make a deal with Emir, and they do support each other in some ways, but it's more of a political thing that she did out of desperation for her people, because Francesca really does care about the plight of the elves and her people. But this way, they made it more of a mystical thing, where she had this vision from this Baba Yaga type Volith Mare character, and that, with her and Fringilla, was what really made this alliance come to be. So, okay. Also, they decided to bring all of the elves to Sintra and make that their home. I really wanted to see more Dolblathana love. I was like, come on, let's go to the valley, Dolblathana. They didn't do that. Maybe they'll do it later in the season. Francesca was a tremendous character. I thought she was really great. They added a lot of stuff to build on Francesca as a character. Francesca's another one who doesn't have a lot of info in the books, so the show took their own liberties on things. They made her pregnant, and I think Filavandrel was the father? At least he was being very fatherly toward the end, so it was pretty implied that he was the father, and so that's the thing. There were a lot of romances added to this, and I was like, as I was watching it, I was like, are they really making Francesca and Filavandrel a thing? I was so confused. I now actually lost my train of thought and where I was going with that. So sorry to everybody watching this. This is a very confusing video. Overall, storytelling wise, I think they did a good job telling the story of the elves. So I was pretty happy with that. And as somebody who loves the story of the elves, I thought it was great. Would have loved to have seen the one in Blood of Elves where they go to Sherowed and learn about Ailerin. A personal favorite part of the book for me, but it's fine. I think the mages were very interesting. I like that they're taking this villain arc for Stregobor. Again, kind of a nobody character in the books, but they decided to really go take Stregobor and go far with him and make him more villainous. And I was like, okay, that's cool. I'm fine with this. The addition of Rience. Rience actually was pretty cool in the show. I honestly think Rience is really dumb in the books. I just think he's a stupid villain and does a lot of stupid things. And he kind of does that in the show too. A lot of the stuff he does is not the smartest. Also, he made his way all the way to Kaer Morhen, which is a shock for me. Him being employed not directly by Emir himself was also interesting. Him being employed by Lydia, which she has her own employer, and if the show is following the books, that employer should be... I actually don't want to say it out loud because I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read the books, because we're not quite there yet, so read the books. And if you want to read the books, you can read them with me. Join me for Witcher Book Club, where every other week or so, I am going to be uploading a video as I read through the entire Witcher book saga. I have already started with the first 4 chapters of Blood of Elves, but I do want to conclude reading Blood of Elves and then move on to Time of Contempt, Baptism of Fire, and so on and so forth. I will be beginning my uploads of those in January and onward. I kind of have to build my schedule out for next year. I'm taking a holiday break, so join me for Witcher Book Club on this YouTube channel. I'll see you there. I also loved Jaskier in this season. He was incredible. I loved his opening song. The minute I heard that song, I was like, oh boy, that's a breakup song if I ever heard one. I think Jaskier needed more screen time. He had a decent amount, but I feel like in season 1, he really dominated most of his scenes. This one, he did dominate a lot of the scenes, but I needed a little bit more of Jaskier in this one. That's all I can really say. Finally, let's talk about the really good thing, which was Geralt and Ciri and their relationship. Once again, Freya Allan and Henry Cavill nail their roles, and I think seeing the relationship between the two of them, this father-daughter relationship, it's moving very quickly. They are very much, I mean, they basically dropped the father-daughter thing right there in the show, and I think that they did tremendous job at this. Freya Allan plays a very more serious Ciri than how I picture it in the books. She's also older than Ciri in the books. In the books, Ciri's only like 12 years old in Blood of Elves. And I think she's a little bit more immature. And this Ciri is a bit more mature. But it works well, in my opinion. I really like the way Geralt and Ciri and their relationship developed. A lot of the conversations that they had, a lot of the teaching moments that happened throughout the season were very, very good. And I was just a really big fan of the two of them throughout the entire thing. Of course, seeing other cool characters like Dijkstra make his appearance was freaking awesome. I really want to see more of Dijkstra, and I'm sure we will in season 3. Same thing with the lovely reveal at the very end of my personal favorite book character, Philippa Eilhart. I really thought we would see her earlier. We kept seeing the owl, and I was like, all right, when is Philippa going to show up? They decided to save that little tidbit for the very end, and I thought it was good. Philippa and Dijkstra will definitely have a bigger role in season 3, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think Triss did amazing in Kaer Morhen. Like I had said earlier, there's a lot of stuff with Triss in the book in Kaer Morhen, and I didn't really touch on a lot of it, but I think it was good for a short season, an 8-episode season. They got what they needed to do, and it was pretty good. It was interesting that they decided to take that Triss wasn't the 14th one on the hill. In the books, Triss is one of the ones that everybody thinks is dead. And they decided that to be Yennefer for this one, though it didn't last for very long. Eventually, she makes herself known, and even Geralt himself finds out from Istrid that Yennefer is not dead. By the way, the Istrid and Geralt interactions, I was hoping they'd be a little more spicy, but that's fine. The last thing that I think was the coolest risk that they took, and I think it is the most exciting one, was the biggest reveal at the very end, where they reveal that Emhyr var Emreis is in fact the father of Cirilla. And that's something that in the book series, it takes a long time for that to be revealed. And in my opinion, I actually think it takes too long to be revealed, that information. Here, they decided to reveal it rather early, and I actually think that it's gonna be interesting. I think maybe Emhyr normally keeps it a little close to his chest. He decided to tell his entire court right at the end that Cirilla was his daughter. Very interesting in that sense, but I kind of like it, and I think it's gonna add a little bit more interesting dynamic to the entire series. Knowing that Emhyr is her father is going to be very interesting. I remember when I was reading through the books, if you've played the games, it's very obvious that Emhyr is Cirilla's father. That's like kind of common knowledge among people who have played the games. But when you're reading the books, it's not very obvious until much, much later in the series. So the fact that they decided to drop that bomb right there, I thought it was kind of cool. And I thought that actually, I applauded that. I was like, okay, let's go. We're doing this. I very much liked it. The final episode did drop a lot of really cool stuff. It was not my favorite episode. I actually think the Volethmer stuff kind of killed it, and they rushed a lot of the other plot lines because they were so focused on the Volethmer stuff. But they dropped the Wild Hunt, which was like kind of cool to see. Some might argue it's a little early to show Wild Hunt stuff, but I personally thought it was kind of cool. I was like, whoa, the Wild Hunt. They dropped the Philippa reveal, so I was like, oh my god, Philippa. And then they dropped the Emhyr reveal, so I was like, oh my god. So those were 3 things that I was like freaking out about in a good way. Everything else I was like watching and like scratching my head like, oh. The last thing that I'll say about this season is they took a lot of risks, and I think that some of them paid off. Some of them, I think we all were kind of scratching our heads at that. Adaptations decide sometimes to take risks in their storytelling, and I've learned that more and more as I was watching this season, that this show is going to be taking their own liberties on a lot of things. Some for the better, some that we may, as fans, question. I am okay to continue watching season 3. I am fine to continue recommending this show to people because as far as entertainment value goes, it's top notch. It's one of the more entertaining shows that I think I can watch in the past couple of years. But I understand that we, as people who have read the books and are really dedicated to the source material, we can find a lot of the things that the showrunners decide to do to be very rage-inducing, and I understand that. I try to take a more nuanced point of view, and I try to look at it from both sides and try to appreciate the art for what it is. And that's really what I'm doing in this video. I hope you all can agree with that to a certain degree. I am very happy to hear your thoughts below. You can tell me that it totally sucked and you hated it, because I've seen don't go on Reddit because it's all negative on Reddit, which I guess is to be expected for, the general Reddit audience. But I've also talked with some of my friends in my podcasting, my Witcher podcast group circles, and a lot of them were critical in certain ways, but overall enjoyed it for what it was. And I think that's a good way to look at it as well. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I am going to be making more videos in the coming weeks about this series. I'm going to be taking a short holiday break, traveling home to see my family, so I won't be recording things until January 2022, but I will be happy to go through each video and break it down and share my own thoughts and feelings on everything too. So I hope to see you all for that, and thank you for watching this video, even though it was kind of all over the place. I appreciate you listening to my thoughts. Sharing initial reactions are always a good thing, and there's probably some things I missed here, but I'm happy to share more in the coming days and hear your all thoughts on it as well. So thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. We will have more Witcher book club in the coming year, so I will see you all then. Goodbye.